And you can't really say that that's doing a whole lot. But I'm excited about this warm weather. Tomorrow's going to be in the 60s and then 70s, and then the next day is going to be back into the 40s. I should have moved to Florida like I wanted to. We all have wants, like me, wanting to always have warm weather, but we also have needs. Everybody has needs that need to be met. And everybody's idea of what their needs are is different. I bet you if you were to ask groups of people what the top 10 needs that they have are, I think 3 of them will be common, maybe 4, 5, but the other ones will be completely different because everybody's idea of what they need is different. Some people will say, hey, we need a better government administration. The same people who disagree with that probably would have said yes to the previous administration. Do we need that? Sure, it seems like it's a pretty good need. Some people will say we need to make abortion illegal. Do you think making abortion illegal will stop abortion? It will not. They proved that in the Prohibition. They made alcohol illegal. Guess what happened? They still had alcohol. Making something illegal is not going to stop people from doing it. You know how I know this? Because the person, the very individual, and I call him an individual, that created the entire world, put laws into effect, and guess what we can't do? And they're for our own good. Just because you make a law doesn't mean that people are going to follow that law. Now, I will say this, if you make it harder to have an abortion, there will be people who obey the law and not have an abortion. But needless to say, some people say we need to make abortion illegal. Other people have a different view. Some people think we need to limit the number of illegal aliens that come into our country. Now, I personally agree with this one. I think one way that we could solve illegal aliens coming into our country is by not giving them any benefits whatsoever. If people come into our country thinking that they're going to get something when they get here, which one of you would not go somewhere where they're going to give free stuff away? I would. Whether you believe it's okay for illegal immigrants to come and make it home, this is America, everybody has a different opinion about it, whether it's a need or not. But let's bring things a little bit closer to home. Those are more political ideas. Let's bring things. How many of you believe, well, you don't have to raise your hand, but just in your thoughts, how many of you believe that you need a new car? You need a new car. What makes you think that you need it? And again, process here for me. Process. You need a new car. Jeanette and I were just talking the other day about her car, and runs just fine. Although I noticed that when you are turning right and you're pushing on the gas, that there's a ticking on the front left tire. It only happens when you're turning right and pushing on the gas at the same time. If any of you know what the cause of that problem is, come talk to me after service. I'd like to find out. But as of yet, I have not figured it out. And so Jeanette and I were talking, it's like, we kind of need a new car. We'll still owe money on this one, so we need to pay it off first. But you guys have seen our car. It's 2012 Honda Pilot. Nice addition. Okay, for us, we're having this conversation. We need a new car, and there are people probably in this room who would say, "I would give anything just to have your car." Is it really a need? Some people say, I need a bigger home. Now, again, Jeanette and I have a pretty good-sized home. It's not small by any means. And while I have said several times, I would love to move out into the country and have a bigger yard, she has adamantly already said, made it extremely clear, we are not moving again, period. So guess what? I'm going to buy the piece of property next to my house, and I'm going to get a bigger yard. It's called compromise. I'm letting her stay in her house, and I get a bigger yard. Or maybe your need is, I need a better job. I need a job that pays more. We have all of these ideas, I need. One of the things that I realized very quickly, especially since I've been married, is that my issue with finances had very little to do with how much I made. It had more to do with how much I spent. And people don't want to hear that because we like to spend. It's just, if you make $40,000 a year, okay, don't go buy a brand new car where you have a $500 car payment and in a huge house in which you have a $1,500 house payment. Listen, it's not wise wise spending of your money. But we like to think, I need these things. And in reality, they're more of a, I want these things. And there's nothing wrong with wants. God gives us our wants sometimes if it's good for us. But then I started thinking about what do we really need? And there are three basic things that you cannot live without. Can you guess what they are? Air, water, food. Now, some people will throw in shelter. But I'm pretty confident that if I lived in Hawaii, I could live on the beach indefinitely. Even in a hurricane, I could. The temperature doesn't sway. I could probably do it. I'm fooling myself, but I like that. Air, food, and water. Things that you need to have to survive. Now, this is not a hard, fast rule, but think of the threes of the three. Okay? So these three, air, food, and water. 3. Most people will die after 3 minutes without oxygen, without being able to breathe. Most people can live 3 days without clean water. And most people can live 3 weeks without a food source. Now, this should amaze you because, as we know, Jesus went how many days without eating? 40. That's almost double the 3 weeks. I know some of you, and I've done this. After about 2.5 days of fasting, you're like going, I'm going to die. No, you're not. You may feel like you're going to die, but you're not. Air, food, and water. These are things that you have to survive, to live this life on earth. But there's an even more important need that we have that we sometimes miss. And that is what I want to talk today about. That one need that you have that you need to live. To find out what that one need is, we're going to go to the book of Luke chapter 15. And Luke, it's a very familiar story that we're going to be talking about today. It's what many people call the story of the prodigal son or the lost son. Starting with verse 11. That's what this Jesus is telling a story, a parable about a family. And so we'll read starting in verse 11, chapter 15. To illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had 2 sons. All right, we're going to stop there for a minute. It's very important to understand the context of the passage you're reading. Okay? Putting everything into context is important when you're dealing with the Bible. And so the very first verse says he's illustrating another point that he has already made. So he's already made a point, and he's just trying to help you understand this point better. So what point did he already make? Well, to do that, you got to jump back into the very first verse of chapter 15. Here's what the first three verses of chapter 15 says. Tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. This made the Pharisees and teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. So Jesus told them this story. Now, he doesn't go jumping into the story of the lost son. So the setting, here's what we have. Jesus is communing with sinful people, and the teachers of the law come and say, hey, you do know what you're doing is wrong. You shouldn't be doing this. And so what Jesus does is he tells them three stories. The first one is about a lost sheep. We sing a song about this. Reckless love. It's about this shepherd who has 100 sheep, and one of them wanders off. One of the commentaries I said just came out and said it just like it is. Sheep are stupid. They'll just walk off. And the shepherd leaves the 99, goes and finds the one, puts it on his shoulders, and carries it back. That's the first story. And then he tells a story of a lady who has 10 coins. She has 10 coins and she loses one. And she searches frantically for that one coin that she had lost until she finds it. And the real crutch of the story that Jesus is trying to understand, and you read this at the end of both of those stories, is that Jesus ends the story with rejoicing because what was lost has been found. Okay? That was the gist of those two stories. The lost sheep, the lost coin. The rejoicing that happens when that which is lost is now found. Then he gets to the story of the prodigal son or the lost son. And remember, he's talking to a group of people who are complaining about him spending time with sinners. You can already kind of formulate in your mind what he's trying to get them to understand. There are lost people, and when these lost people are found, we should be rejoicing. Then he goes into the final story of the three, which is the story of the lost son. And if you've been in church at all, you don't even have to have been in church. You understand the concept of the prodigal son. You get it. But one of the things that we fail to understand about this story is the extent of what Jesus is trying to teach. Both of the two previous stories that he talks about, the lost shepherd and the lost sheep and the lost coin, both of those stories were short and went straight to the point. This next story, he spends over 20 verses telling this story. And he gets very specific about things. I used to believe that this story only had one meaning behind it, and that was the rejoicing of the lost son when he is found. But if Jesus just wanted us to focus on that one thing, why did he go into great detail about the story? He did it because he wanted us to understand really ideas within this story. And three of them, the average person is going to say, I get that, I get that, I get that. The last the last thing I'm going to share with you today is going to be something that maybe you had not thought of before, but you need to. Especially being somebody who calls themselves who calls themselves a Christian, who believes in God, who loves God, who follows Jesus. So let's look at this story. We know that this man had 2 sons. Verse 12, the younger son told his father, I want my share of the estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, the younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land. And there he wasted all his money in wild living. About that time, his money ran out. A great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him. But no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Please take me on as a hired hand. This son is what the part of the story that encapsulates this son's experience is what I'm going to call the obvious sin. Because it's obvious what he has done. He went to his father and said, hey, I want my inheritance. That's what he was asking. I want my inheritance. Now, if you know anything about inheritance, when do you typically get an inheritance? After your parents die. And that was typical in this day too. The children would not get their inheritance before their death. So what he was asking was countercultural to what they were doing. And a side note, what he was asking for was not readily available. It wasn't like this guy could go down to the bank and draw out a certain amount of money and give it to his son. It wasn't like disposable cash that he had lying around. He didn't put all of his money in a mason jar and bury it in the backyard. That's why I said a few days later. It's because it took a while. Now, how much did he get? Well, this man was wealthy because not only did he have a lot, but he had hired servants who was given enough to eat. He had a lot. Now, 2 sons. One thing we don't realize in this story is that if a man had more than 1 son, their inheritance did not get divided evenly. Deuteronomy talks about this. In the Jewish culture, the first son would get a double portion of the inheritance. So, if this man had 2 sons, you would take the 2 sons, you would add a third division. So he would divide his money into 3 parts. 2 parts, a double portion, would go to the older son, and 1 part would go to the younger son. If he had 10 sons, well, we'll go with 9 to make it a little easier. If he had 9 sons, he would add a portion to make it 10. The oldest son would get 2 portions, and the rest of the sons would all get 1 portion. That was common practice. That's what they did. So this man, even though he only got a third of what was the father's, the father still gave it to him. And as we know, he goes out, getting this before his father dies, he goes out and he wastes his inheritance. One of the when I was younger, a lot younger, the idea of winning the lottery just fascinated me. It fascinated. Why? Because who would not want to have $50 million? I'm just saying. Anybody here not want $50 million? Okay, good. Some of you Teenagers, well, wait till you grow up. $50 million, everybody would think about what you could do. And I know everybody's, if you were like me, here was your thought process. Okay, God, if you allowed me to win $50 million, I will give you half of it. Because that still leaves me with $25 million. I could do a lot of good stuff with $25 million. A lot of good stuff for me, of course, with $25 million. You know what? If you really want to win the lottery and you want God's help doing it, probably your prayer would be something like this. God, if you help me win $50 million, I will give you $49,999,908, and I'll just be happy to have those $2 left over. Chances are God's more willing to answer that prayer than if you offer to give him half. Because in reality, it's all his anyway. But one of the things that I thought was interesting in reading stories about people who have won the lottery is how many of them ended up at some point later on in life, ended up broke like they were before. How in the world can you win $100 million and be broke 15 years later? That's where this kid was. He was given this amazing inheritance, and he went off the same way with these people who spend all of their winnings. They go off, and they just, there's no concept of taking care of what's been given to you. I have a family member, and I don't want to go into detail because if he ever hears this, I don't want him thinking I'm talking bad about him, but he's a fairly close family member, and he has no concept of money. In high school, he used to just give it away freely. And of course, his parents would give it to him, so his parents would partly just give it to him, and he'd give it away. Hey, it's great to be generous. I get it. It's great to be generous. But at some point in time, you have to think, well, where am I getting this money from? And what should I actually been doing with it? So what this guy and my family member, they were taking something that belonged to somebody else in reality, and they were just throwing it away. Parents, you know what this is like. When you spend a lot of money on a gift for your child, and they break it within 2 weeks. You spend $1,000 on a cell phone, and they drop it and crack the screen, and now you got to spend another $300 to get the screen fixed. You know what the teenager will do? They'll take care of that phone if you let them pay for it out of their own money. Now, I'm not saying don't get your kids nice stuff. Don't get me wrong. Things that we earn on our own become valuable to us. Things that are given to us are less valuable to us. He lavishly wasted his inheritance, and we have no clue how much he was given, but we know it was a lot. And then something bad happens. A famine hits. This is an important part of the story, because if the famine hadn't hit, maybe the outcome might have been different. Because he could have very well, if there wasn't a famine, then jobs wouldn't be hard to find, and maybe he could have gotten a better job. The famine hit. Things were tight. Money was hard to come by. Jobs were hard to come by. And so when he finally gets a job, it's doing the worst thing that a Jew could possibly think about doing. Taking care of a pig. We don't think too much of it. I mean, I think pigs are sloppy, and there's actually people out there, and if you are one of them, I apologize. There are people out there who think pigs are cute. You're wrong. Piglet, Piglet, the little character on Winnie the Pooh, that's cute. Cute. You go see a pig in its natural environment, cute is not what comes to mind. Not to me, anyway. But for them, for a Jew, he was having to take care of an animal that he should not be around. It was an unclean animal. Jesus was making a point here. This man realized that sin is great for a season. But there comes a time when sin, it doesn't get its due. You're going to have to pay, the old term, pay the piper. There's going to be a period in life where sin will catch up to you. And if it's not in this life, it's going to be the life to come. So we have this famine hit, and he has to go, and he hires himself out, and he hates his job. Can anybody relate? He hates his job because it's just not satisfying. He hates his life because he doesn't have enough food. And he's longing to eat the pods the pigs eat. Okay, again, we have a hard time understanding or relating to that. So let me help you understand this a little bit better. Imagine going out into the backyard, and you have your dog bowl out there sitting on the, and you just got done putting a little bit of dog food in there, and you decide that you're just going to bend down and you're just going to start eating it out of the dog bowl. Oh, but first you have to realize that your dog has already been there eating it, and there's probably some dog hair in there, and maybe some dirt ground in there, because obviously your dog, it's been outside, it's probably going to get kind of dirty. Think about how hungry you would have to be to actually consume that food. And I know they say on the can or the bag, all natural. That's how you know what that means, right? That means they're not telling you the complete truth. You don't know what you're eating. All grain, food. What they didn't tell you is that they pulled up some of the dirt and threw it in there too. This man was dying of hunger. I could imagine. Remember we talked about 3 weeks without food? I can imagine he's been going about 3 weeks running on next to no food at all, and he's dying of hunger. And then something happens. Something happens. Verse 17, when he finally came to his senses. When he finally came to his senses, you know what that means? When he finally wised up. When he stopped being stupid. I know that stupid's a bad word. I grew up, my mom used to slap me in the face when I said the word stupid. But it's such a cool word. He was finally coming to his senses. He was not allowing ignorance to run his decision-making any longer. We all need to get to that point. We all need to get to that point. He makes this, he comes to his senses, and he says, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. So I will go home to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy to be called to your son. Please take me as your hired servant. Here is the turning point. Isn't that he came to his senses. The turning point is after he came to his senses, he realized what he needed to do. He needed to go home. But not just go home. He needed to go home with the right attitude. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. He understood that when he took his inheritance and he went and he left, he was pretty much saying, my family is dead. That's pretty much what he was saying. Specifically his father. because you don't get your inheritance until your father is not alive anymore. He came to his senses. He reacted in humility, or he acted in humility after he came to his senses. And we need to learn from this. He had an obvious sin, but he eventually came to his senses. But what did it take for him to come to his senses? What did it take? It took him almost starving to death before he came to his senses. Nobody is going to accept Jesus. Nobody is truly going to accept and build a relationship with Jesus if they first do not understand that they need him, that they cannot live without him. Why don't you go and get a plastic bag and go over to your spouse and shove it over your spouse's head and hold it there for 5 minutes? Why don't you do that? Because you love your spouse. Or you should. No, you love your spouse. You don't do that. You know that they need something. It's called air. And if they don't have air, guess what? If you were to take, it doesn't matter who it is, be your spouse, anybody, you would take a bag over somebody's head, guess what they would do? Well, before they died, they would do something else. They would fight as hard as they can to get that bag off of their head. Why? Because they realize without it, they are dead. We all need to come to that realization. Without Jesus, without the Father's love, we are spiritually dead. The problem is so many people, they miss it. And it's because they never get to that point of desperation. That point of Satan has put a bag over their head, and they've never reached the point where they realize that without the breath of God, they are dead. He realizes this, and he goes back to his father. Start in verse 20. So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to the father, "Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son." It's interesting that the same thing that he actually said to his father was the thing that he said he was going to say to his father. Have you ever practiced something? Like maybe you had to go talk to your boss about a raise, and so you went through your mind, okay, this is what I'm going to say, and this is how I'm going to say it, and I'm going to be firm about it, but not too firm that I get fired. That's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to do. Or maybe you have this person you like. And if you're married, you better have somebody you like. Now, after you've been married a while, you don't practice it anymore. Maybe we should. Probably help us out a little bit. Maybe we should. But this person you want to ask them out on a date, and so you just kind of in the movies you see them talking on the phone, but nobody's on the other end. That's what happens in the movies. Or they're standing in front of a mirror. That's what happens in real life. If you do that in real life, well, more power to you. I never did that. But what I did do is I would talk it through myself. I would say, okay, hi, how you doing? Are you tired? Oh, you should be, because you've been running through my mind all day. Can I take that jacket? Because you look hot. I'm just telling you, I never use those. I'm just saying, people do use them. And that's what I think he did that because he wanted to make sure that he communicated effectively. If anybody knows me really well, my wife could attest to this. The thing, and I kind of alluded to this last week, the thing that irritates me more than anything else is being misunderstood. So I practice things to make sure that I am understood. And I think he did this. He wanted to make sure that he communicated everything correctly. Verse 22. But his father said to the servants, quick, bring the finest robe out of the house and put it on him. Get the ring for his finger and sandals, put it on his feet. Kill the fatted calf, or kill the calf we've been fatting. Let's celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead and is now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found. So the party began. Now, there's a lot that we can read in between the lines on here. We could say, it says he saw him from a long way off. The father must have been looking for him. Well, okay, you could draw that conclusion, but there's no indication of that. Listen, you see things a long way off, even things you're not looking for. We could draw that conclusion. But one thing we do know, that there's no drawing of conclusion. We know this for sure. It says here, when he was still a long way off, the father saw him coming, filled with love and compassion. He ran to his son. There's no misinterpreting that. He ran to his son. If you love somebody and you have to spend a long time apart, when you see them again finally, and we lose some of this in today's society where you have FaceTime and you can call them on the phone and talk to them all the time. But when you haven't been able to talk to somebody or see somebody for a long period of time, yeah, why not run? Well, here's the thing, and we lose this because we don't understand the Jewish culture. It was unacceptable for men to run. And it's not the running really that was the unacceptable, although they frowned upon it, but it was the showing of your legs. So guess what, man? No more shorts. Can't show your legs anymore. No, it was unacceptable to show their legs. So for a man to run in these days, remember, they wore long robes. We call them dresses, but that's not what they call them back then. And so when men run, men, have you ever tried running in a dress? Don't admit to it if you have. Don't admit to it. You got to get your feet, because you can't stretch your feet out. When you're running normally, man, you long strides. I'm taller than my wife. Guess what? Her stride in running is longer than mine. That means for every 10 steps she makes, I got to make 12. No wonder I'm more tired at the end of the day than she is. So for men in that culture to run, they had to do, and maybe you've heard this term, grid up their loins. It's a term that it really means prepare for action. But it actually had a specific thing that they would do. And they would, they're wearing this dress robe-like thing. To run fast, they would have to grab a hold of it and bring it above their knees so that they can take long, otherwise they're running like a penguin. It was socially unacceptable for them to do that, but he did it anyway. Why did he do it? Because of his love. The father was willing to surpass social norms and etiquette because of his love for his son. Remember, this is an illustration of the Father, God, Yahweh, and his children. And what is so amazing about this isn't just the fact that he ran, but he ran to the Son who abandoned everything that the Father held and cherished. It's a story of love, compassion, and forgiveness. Then we read what the father does. After he embraces him and he kisses him continually. The Greek here is not just he kissed him. It was he kept on kissing him. He was loving on his son. And then he said, quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his fingers and sandals for his feet. In the process of loving his son, running to his son, he's showing his son he still loves him unconditionally and is willing to reinstate his position in the family. If you cannot see the correlation between this story and the story of Jesus and his love for his people, and God and Yahweh for his love, you must be blind or deaf or both. This is the father's reaction. So you have a son, the obvious sin, and then you have the father's reaction, unconditional love, reinstating this son. But that's not the end of the story. It's a great story. A story of compassion, of forgiveness, of unconditional love when somebody has betrayed you. But that's not the end. In fact, we're only halfway through the story. I got another 45 minutes of preaching to do. Good thing you're not going anywhere for lunch, right? That was a joke. I'm not going to preach for another 45 minutes, I don't think. So we read about another son. Meanwhile, the older son, verse 25, was in the field working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house. And he asked one of the servants, "What's going on?" "Your brother is back," he was told, "and your father has killed a fatted calf, and we are celebrating because of his safe return." The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, "All these years I've slaved for you, never once refused to do a single thing you told me. And in all that time, you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing a fatted calf." This is the real idea that Jesus is wanting the Pharisees to understand, is the reaction of this older son. And again, upon initial view, he seemed to be the good son who didn't do anything wrong. Right? He didn't go squander the father's wealth. He was out working in the field, seeming to be doing exactly what the father wanted. But there's a small problem in the way we look at the reaction of the older son. We know his reaction is wrong. And most of us understand the reasoning behind his wrong reaction. It's because he didn't celebrate. He wasn't joyful at his son's return. But that's not the root of the problem. That's what he did. That was a symptom. But there's an even deeper root issue that we see here, and it's something I talk about all the time. There's a couple of things that we can notice. The first is verse 29. But he replied, "All these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me. And in all that time, you never gave me one young goat for a feast with my friends." You know what that is? I do for you, you do for me. He was viewing this relationship with his father as a contract. Because I've done all these things for you, I was expecting you to do something for me, but you never did. I am so thankful that God does not deal with me the way I often deal with him and other people. Because sometimes it's like, you didn't do anything for me, I ain't doing anything for you. Or, okay, I can do this for you, but in the back of my mind I'm thinking, okay, so I've got to figure out, if I do this for them, how's it going to help me out? And that's a natural human response, but it's not a godly response. We talk about this prodigal son going off and doing these terrible things and then coming back. In the end of the story, which one do you think pleased the father the more? The prodigal son or the one who stayed home? We think how terrible the prodigal son is, stealing from his father and going off and wasting it, and then coming back begging to be taken back and his needs being supplied. What we see in this second son, and this is really the idea that Jesus is trying to get to, what we see in the second son is a hidden sin. And those are often, so much more difficult and so much more dangerous because they're hidden. You know what that sin was? It was an issue of the heart. He didn't love what the Father loved, and he didn't rejoice with the Father. His response, this older son's response, was merely a contract-based response. You didn't do for me, so why should I be happy when you're happy? But that's not the end of the story either. Because there is one more thing that happens in the last couple of verses. We have this obvious sin by this younger brother, and we have the father's response in accepting him back. Then we have this hidden sin by the older brother saying, and here's why I say it's so grave. First of all, the father is celebrating with his younger son, and the older son refuses to come inside the house. He could care less about the younger son and about the rejoicing the father was having because the younger son was back. But then we read what the father does. Verse 31. Actually, no. Let's back up. Verse 28, the older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. We just talked about that. Then we read, his father came out and begged him. We talk about how this prodigal son went and did all this stuff and then comes back, and when the father sees him, runs to him. But that's not the only son that the father goes out to meet. He goes out and meets this older son too. One that has this hidden sin. And this hidden sin is really simple. He does not have the father's heart. His heart is selfish, prideful. And the father still goes out and begs him to come in. The amazing thing that I see in this story about the father is that it did not matter which son it was, or how far he had to go, what it cost him. He didn't care. Listen, if the father was inside, and we miss this in culture, but if the father was inside celebrating, it wasn't like he should go outside and have to persuade his son to come in. His son was being disrespectful by not coming in and celebrating with them. And instead of the father going out going, well, why didn't you come in like you were supposed to? You know better than that. Get your hiney inside before I spank it. That's how we would have responded. When your kid does something bad, the first thing you want to do, well, I don't know about you guys, but first thing I want to do is show him who's boss. And again, don't get in the habit of begging your kid to do what's right. Don't do that, because that creates a whole bad adult. But respond and act passionately with unconditional love as this father did. You know, one thing we don't see at the end of this story is how the older son responds. But you know what? Doesn't matter. Because the story, while the story is about rejoicing for the lost being found, the story really is about the Father. The Father. The story is about his unconditional love. If I was to retitle this story, instead of calling it the prodigal son or the lost son, I would call it the forgiving father. Because this story is more than just about one man who went off and wasted what he had and came back and he's found. Sure, that's a great story. But it's really about the Father, unconditional love, the forgiving Father who is willing to meet his kids wherever they are. I'm going to have the worship team come up. And we're going to sing a last song of worship before we dismiss. I grew up in a Christian home for as long as I can remember. When I was, the first remembrance of church activity that I can remember, and part of it's because I have a terrible memory, was about third grade. And there would be a Southern Baptist, because I was living in Alabama at the time. There was a Southern Baptist church, and they had a children's pastor who would drive a big old bus around and pick up all of the kids. And we'd all get on that bus, and we would go, and man, you could not pay me enough money to drive a church bus. I drove school bus for a couple of years, and that was bad enough. But you get a bunch of Christian kids in a bus, oh, that's a whole nother story. Because you got to discipline them on the bus and make them want to come back. I don't know how you do it. I grew up, as long as I can remember, going to church, being a part of church. And as I was preparing this message, I had to think about, who do I identify with? Well, okay, maybe I identify a little bit with the father, because I am a father and I have a son. But you know what? Not really, because we don't have a lot. Can't really identify with the father. Can't really identify with the young son either. Because like I said, I grew up, I didn't get involved in a bunch of bad stuff. I didn't go hang out with prostitutes. Listen, you don't go just to hang out with a prostitute. I didn't get involved in the drug scene and the party scene. I could tell you, before I was 21, I can count on one finger how many times alcohol has crossed my lips. Can anybody count that high? I couldn't have died. I couldn't understand the situation with the younger son. But I can relate to the older son. How many times I put what I want before what God wanted? I don't know where you're at today. Maybe your life resembles more of the younger son. Maybe your life resembles more of the older son. It doesn't matter. Maybe you're somewhere in between. God is telling all of us that he loves us unconditionally. And he is willing to do, he has already done what it takes to be reunited with us. All we have to do is accept what he has. Accept what he's given to us. We're going to sing one final song, and it's aptly named Run to the Father. As we sing this song, I don't know, like I said, I don't know where you're at. As we sing this song, I want you to run to the Father. He loves you. More than you know. He only wants what's best for you. You're going to go crying like a baby again. This is 2 weeks in a row. This is getting to happen. Don't leave this room without experiencing the love of the Father fresh and anew. There's no reason why we have to leave this room with anything other than God's blessing in our lives. And it starts with worship. So as we sing this song, let's worship.
Carried a burden for too long on my own. I wasn't created to bear it alone. I hear your invitation to let it all go. And I see it now, I'm laying it down, and I know that I need you. I run to the Father, I fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, the reason to wait. My heart needs a surgeon, my soul needs a friend. So I run to the Father again. Again and again. Oh, oh, oh. You saw my condition, had a plan from the start. Your Son for redemption, the price for mine. I don't have a concept for that kind of love. I don't understand, I can't comprehend. All I know is I need you. I run to the Father, I fall into grace. Done with the So I run to the Father again and again and again and again. Oh, oh, again and again and again and again. Oh, 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 my heart has been in your sights long before my first breath, running into your arms, running to life from death. And I feel this rush deep in my chest. Your mercy is calling out. And just as I am, you pull me in. And I know I need you now. I run to the Father, I fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, no reason to wait. My heart needs a surgeon, my soul needs a friend. So I run to the Father again and again. I run to the Father, I fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, no reason to wait. My heart found the surgeon, my soul found the friend. So I run to the Father again and again and again and again. Oh, oh, again and again and again and again. Oh, oh, oh.
My heart has been in your sight long before my first breath. Running into your arms is like running to life from death. I feel the rush deep in my chest. Your mercy is calling out. Just as I am, you pull me in, and I need to know you now. I started this message talking about things we need. And that's how I'm going to end it. We need to realize, even more than the air we breathe, we need to realize who we are in God's sight. Who we are in God's sight. Doesn't matter where we've been, what we've done, what other people think of us. We are a child of a living God who will do whatever it takes to get to us. Heavenly Father, we love you for being a Father who will run to his children, who will meet us where we are, who will beg us to come in and be with him, be with you. Meet us where we're at, God. Work in our lives and help us when we do stray to come to our senses and come back to you. Help us when we think we're okay to realize we need you. Because what you really want isn't some rote obedience. What you really want is our heart.
Father, fall into grace. Done with the idol, reason to wait. My heart found a surgeon, my soul found a friend. So I run to the Father again and again. I run to the Father, I fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, no reason to wait. My heart found a surgeon, my soul found a friend. So I run to the Father again and again and again and again. Oh, oh, again and again and again and again. Oh, oh, oh.
I really feel I need to say this. So maybe you're here and you have no clue what a relationship with God looks like. Maybe you're this son or daughter who was never at home. You never had a relationship with Jesus. You never had God as your father. And you're like, well, I have never felt that love. Listen, it doesn't matter whether you know God or not. God knows you. And he wants a relationship with you. Jesus came, lived a perfect life, knowing he was going to die, and did, because he loves you. And what he asks in return is really quite obvious. All he asks in return is for you to love him back. Now, there's some pastors who will lead you in a prayer and say, repeat after me, and why those are okay. God doesn't necessarily want you to repeat after me. He wants you to express in your own words. And so if you want to receive Jesus, maybe you have received Jesus and you become that young son and you've ran away. Or maybe you've been like that second son and you've been at home the whole time, but your priorities, your heart was not in the right place. If you fit any one of those, coming back to the Father is real simple. Realize that you've sinned. Realize that you've broken God's law. Realize that you can't do it on your own. Admit to God just that. Ask him to forgive you and decide that you're going to go a different way. That's what repentance is. It's, instead of heading this way, I'm going to turn around and head this way. Instead of going away from the Father, I'm going to turn around and go to the Father. You admit, you confess, you ask for forgiveness, and then you do everything in your power to love the Father, to love Jesus. Whatever that looks like, you do everything in your power to love Jesus. Now, I'm going to give you some advice here. Find out what God's word says about loving God, because that's where you need to go to figure out how to love God. So I'm going to close in prayer. If you need to pray that prayer, you go ahead and, in your own words, tell God, say, hey, I've sinned. I need your forgiveness. Help me to make you Lord of my life. And help me to live out what you're doing in me. Heavenly Father, we love you. We thank you for the people here. God, you're working on their hearts. I just ask right now that you would move upon them. Whether they're in this room or watching online, if there's somebody in this room who needs to refocus their life to chasing after the Father, I pray that you would bring forgiveness, that you would bring repentance into their life. You would bring wisdom. And you would help them love you the way you've loved them. We love you and we thank you. We ask all of this in your name. Amen. Amen. All right. So here's how this is going to look.